These are two different redwood clones, or two different fairy rings. And you can actually tell the difference between them based on their sprouts. You can see these sprouts are a little bit more blue colored, these are more green. Do you notice another difference between them?
This looks denser.
The foliage is denser here. You can't really see the vertical trunks in this cluster, whereas here the vertical trunks are very well exposed, right? So this would be two examples if you're ever doing a redwood loop walk to try and give people the idea that these trees are more than just individual trees, but they're clusters of them. This whole cluster came from a single seed, and this whole cluster came from a single seed. We don't know how old they are. My guess would be 5,000-ish years old, of just sprouting and resprouting and resprouting. There's a docent, Henry Cowell, that described it as, you could think of like stalks of celery. I think that's a really good description, where each trunk is sort of like one stalk of celery that's all coming from a common, well, both a common root system, but also that common lignotuber, the common woody potato burrow-y thing.
Zane,
under its base.
What are the feeling about the age of roots of redwoods?
They could be as old as the clone, and
much older, and maybe
well, maybe older. Yeah.
yeah.
We have no idea. We don't know almost anything about redwood roots.
So when we use the term old growth, it's used so loosely. Do you have a definition that you prefer for?
Yeah. So there are two camps. There are people who say there are old growth trees, and there are people who say there are old growth forests. The ecologists prefer old growth forest because how do you describe a young tree, like a young tree in Big Basin like we have here, in a not logged forest? I wouldn't call the young little sapling old, right? But it is in an old growth forest. So, so people like Steve Sillett and other ecologists prefer old growth forest. If I say the word old growth tree, that's a problem with those folks. So, what he calls them are old veteran trees.
Okay, technical.
And I'm not sure. I'm not sure if there's a good way to describe it. But there's the camp of old growth forest, old growth tree. The term old growth refers to characteristics of a tree or a forest, where you see large platform branches, you see diameters over 1 meter in size. Maybe some self-pruning of the branches, where the first branches are much higher up the trunks. So up to you. Most of the public uses the word old growth tree. I will use that word too, to some people's
depending on who your audience is.
so, but technically, ecologically speaking, it's old growth forest, and a lot of the trees inside of it are part of that forest.
But it wouldn't be wrong, because if you're in a place where they cut trees, but they left the old growth tree,
Yeah.
how do you describe? It's not
So
an old
he
growth
describes
forest
that as an
anymore.
old veteran,
An old
and I've
veteran.
only seen that in Steve's papers.
Okay.
But maybe it's elsewhere in the literature. I describe that as or residual old growth is often a phrase that is
Oh,
used.
that
So
would make
residual
sense.
meaning
Residual old growth.
it was
That
left
makes
over.
Semantics.
That makes more sense.
Yes.